Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I don't know what finally snapped in her, but something about the way I said no this time hit a nerve she'd been sharpening for years. My sister stood in the middle of my living room with her arms crossed so tight her knuckles turned white, her face red with that familiar self-righteous rage she always pulled out when she didn't get her way. "You're so damn selfish," she shouted, loud enough that the neighbors probably paused their TV. Family helps family, or at least that's what Mom always said. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat on the edge of the couch, watching her pace like a caged animal. She wasn't asking this time, she was demanding. Again. It was the fifth time this year she'd asked for money. Not for rent, not for food, not for medical bills or anything that would have made me pause with a sliver of guilt. No, this time it was for some business scheme, something half-baked and slippery that she swore would change everything. And like every other time, it came wrapped in emotional blackmail. "You always had it easier," she added, throwing in that old bone again, like my steady job and decent choices were something I owed to her by birthright. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I'm not doing this again, Amanda." That was it. 9 words. That's all it took for her to lose her damn mind. She started ranting louder, flinging out phrases like cold-hearted and ungrateful, turning herself into the tragic victim of a cruel, stingy sister who'd rather sit on her money than lift a finger to help. She even brought up the time I didn't show up for her birthday 3 years ago, as if that had anything to do with this. But here's the thing, what she didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that I wasn't just saying no to her today. I was biting my tongue so hard I could taste blood, holding back something I'd been carrying for months. Something heavy. Something ugly. Something that would rip through this little pity party like a wrecking ball. And if you're sitting there wondering why I didn't just throw it in her face right then and there, trust me, I wanted to. I wanted to drop that truth like a hammer. But I've learned the hard way, timing is everything. And her little outburst? That was just the start of the show. I'd been patient this long, I could wait a little longer. Still, as she stood there, shouting about loyalty and family and how I'd always been the one to look down on her, my mind wandered back to the first time she asked me for money. It was just a couple $100s, she said. Just something to tide her over. I gave it to her without thinking. Then it was 500. Then 1,000. Then she maxed out a credit card I co-signed when I was stupid enough to trust her. Every time, there was a new excuse, a new reason, a new sob story. And every time, I bought into it until I didn't. I remembered the way Mom used to look at her like she was made of glass, always one crack away from falling apart. Meanwhile, I was the one expected to hold everything together. That dynamic didn't vanish just because we got older. It just got nastier. Amanda learned how to twist guilt into a knife, and I let her cut me with it, over and over again. So now, sitting here with her voice bouncing off the walls, I wasn't just tired. I was done. Done playing the responsible one, the understanding one, the one who always gave her the benefit of the doubt. That's the thing no one tells you about family. You can love someone and still not trust a damn word they say. She finally stopped yelling long enough to glare at me, waiting for me to respond. But I didn't. I just stood up, grabbed the mug I'd been holding, and walked into the kitchen like she hadn't just accused me of being the villain in her personal soap opera. My silence made her angrier. "Wow," she said, half laughing, half snarling. "You really don't give a shit, do you?" I didn't answer. Not yet. But I looked back at her, and I let the silence stretch long enough to sting. Because even if she didn't know it yet, this wasn't just about money. This wasn't even about me being selfish. No, this was about something bigger. Something darker. And as I opened the cabinet and set the mug down, I said the only thing I was ready to say. "You should leave now." Her mouth dropped open like she couldn't believe I'd just kicked her out. But she stormed out eventually, muttering curses under her breath, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the silence afterward, staring at that door for a long while. And then I whispered to myself, low and steady, but there's something she doesn't know yet. I didn't start digging because I wanted revenge, and I sure as hell didn't do it because I thought I'd enjoy what I found. If anything, I hoped I'd be wrong. I hoped there was nothing under the surface, no rot hiding beneath the family smiles and the forced holiday hugs. But when someone pushes you long enough, lies to your face enough times, drains your patience one drop at a time until you're just an empty shell holding a fake smile, you either walk away or you start watching. Quietly, carefully, ruthlessly. That night after Amanda left, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her voice in my head, all that righteous indignation, all that twisted entitlement. I started thinking back to little moments, things that didn't make sense when they happened, but now flickered in my memory like warning lights I hadn't paid attention to. A phone call she cut short when I walked into the room. A vague conversation with our cousin Mark that ended the second I approached. A weird comment from my aunt last Thanksgiving, something about Amanda, looking into property stuff. At the time, I didn't think twice. Now, I couldn't stop thinking. I started going through old text threads, reading every message she'd sent me over the last year. Not just the obvious ones, but the in-between lines, the excuses, the odd phrasing, the deflections. Something wasn't right. She kept referencing financial pressure, talking about assets and opportunities, but she never said where the money was going. I'd asked her once directly and she'd snapped, saying it wasn't my business. That should have told me everything right then and there, but I brushed it off. I wanted to believe she was just scattered. That was always her excuse, just a little scattered, a little overwhelmed, a little unlucky. But people who are just unlucky don't lie like that. They don't hide things in plain sight. I checked her social media, what little she hadn't locked down. She'd posted a photo 3 weeks ago at a coffee shop, tagged with some guy named Mitch. Just 2 mugs on the table and some generic caption like, "Big plans coming soon." It was nothing on its own. But when I zoomed in, I noticed a company logo on a folder near her hand, something called Clearline Real Estate Group. I didn't know the name, but something about it bothered me. I did some digging. Their website looked cheap, slapped together, like someone was trying too hard to look professional. But one thing stood out, they specialized in quick private sales, off-market transactions, the kind of language that screamed secrecy. I checked their listings. Nothing in our neighborhood. Not yet, but I wasn't convinced. So I called the number on the site, pretending to be someone interested in selling a property. The voice on the other end was smooth, too smooth. Mitch. Same guy from the coffee shop photo. He talked fast, promised fast closings, said they could handle the messy family details. That line stuck with me like a splinter in the skin. I asked casually if they'd done business in the Eastwood area recently, our neighborhood, and he paused. Then he said, "Yeah, we're working on something near there. Probate property, I think." Real sweet deal. My stomach dropped. Probate property. That was Grandma's house. You have to understand, that house wasn't just a building to us. It was where my brother took his first steps. Where my father used to fix the old swing set in the backyard. Where our mother spent every damn Sunday baking bread and humming along to her cassette tapes. That house was our roots, our bloodline. And Amanda? She was trying to rip it out and sell it off like it was a used couch on Craigslist. That's when it clicked, the sudden financial desperation, the strange phone calls, the timing of her outbursts. She'd already gone behind our backs and started the process. She wasn't asking for help because she needed it. She was trying to keep me distracted while she finished gutting the family legacy. So I went deeper. I pulled bank records, checked county property filings, anything I could access. I found an unsigned preliminary sale agreement. Her name was on it. Not as the owner, she couldn't be, but as the interested party facilitating the transaction on behalf of the estate. Except no one else in the family knew anything about it. She was forging a story around everyone. She wasn't just sneaky, she was methodical. And I know some people might say I went too far, that I was spying, that I should have confronted her sooner. But I needed proof, not just instinct. I needed her to see it in black and white, without a single inch of denial left to cling to. Have you ever been guilt-tripped by someone who hides behind the word family? Who makes you feel like the bad guy while plotting their next betrayal? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments because I know I'm not the only one. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones carving up the floor beneath our feet while they smile at us across the dinner table. I printed everything I found. Emails, phone call logs, the property draft, screenshots. I slipped it all into a plain folder and labeled it with a black marker, nothing flashy, just 2 words that made my stomach turn as I wrote them, just in case. And I swear to you, as I slid that folder into the drawer of my desk, my hands were shaking. Not because I was scared, not anymore, but because I knew I was about to burn down every lie she'd built. And once the fire started, there'd be no stopping it. The thing about family dinners is that they always start out with that forced cheerfulness, the kind where everyone pretends they've left their bitterness at the door, only for it to slowly drip back in between the cracks of the conversation. That Sunday, it was roast chicken and mashed potatoes, Mom's usual attempt to recreate some sense of tradition, some anchor in a sea that's long since turned sour. The table was set just like it always had been, too many side dishes, cloth napkins nobody actually used, and the same mismatched wine glasses from 20 years ago. The food smelled good, the lighting was warm, and for a brief moment, I almost believed we could get through the evening without anyone throwing a punch, figurative or otherwise. But even before Amanda opened her mouth, I could feel it in the air. That slow, creeping tension that wraps itself around your ribs like a cold hand, something unspoken but pulsing, like a low hum of electricity under the floorboards. She was too quiet at first, which was its own warning sign. Amanda was never quiet unless she was waiting to perform. Her smile was too tight, her eyes too bright, and the way she kept glancing at me from across the table made it clear she was gearing up for something. My partner, Eli, sat beside me and gently touched my knee under the table, a silent question, a quiet tether. He knew the storm was coming too. He'd seen the folder. He'd seen me print the documents, organize them in a neat little stack like a war general prepping battle plans. He didn't ask questions, just watched me move through those days with a kind of quiet reverence, like he knew this was something I needed to handle on my own terms. We were halfway through the second round of wine when Amanda finally struck. She didn't ease into it, didn't try to be subtle. That wasn't her style. "You know," she said loudly, looking around the table with that practiced air of casual drama, "it's funny how some people in this family have everything, and some of us have to beg just to get by." I didn't look at her. I just took another sip of my wine and kept my face neutral. I could feel my mother stiffen beside Amanda, could see my father's eyes flick toward me without turning his head. It was always like this. Every jab from her was coded in just enough ambiguity to keep everyone guessing whether she was starting a fight or just being dramatic. But we all knew. We always knew. Amanda leaned forward, her fork clinking against her plate. "I'm just saying," she continued, louder now, "some people could do a lot more to help if they weren't so damn stingy. I mean, come on, it's not like you're poor, right?" Her eyes locked onto mine, daring me to respond, baiting me in front of the whole family like it was a game she'd already decided she was going to win. I still didn't say a word. That was the thing that always got to her more than anything, my silence. She could scream, cry, throw every guilt trip she had in her arsenal, but nothing made her unravel faster than me refusing to take the bait. Eli squeezed my hand under the table again, a little tighter this time. I could feel his pulse through his fingertips. My sister's voice climbed a few notches higher, the venom now unmistakable. "You've always been jealous of me," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut through the thick air in the room. "You never wanted me to get ahead. Never wanted me to have a real shot at anything. Admit it." I turned my head then, slowly, deliberately, and looked her straight in the face. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, and I swear you could hear a pin drop between the clinking of utensils and the soft hum of the ceiling fan above us. My mother opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing he'd stayed home. Amanda leaned back, folding her arms like she'd made some kind of point, like she'd finally unmasked me in front of everyone and was now waiting for the audience to applaud. That's when I reached down beside my chair, fingers wrapping around the folder I'd kept hidden inside my purse the entire evening. The same folder I'd labeled, just in case, but had always known I'd eventually use. I placed it on the table slowly, deliberately, without saying a single word. Just the sound of paper hitting wood, no theatrics, no announcements, no preamble. Amanda's eyes flicked to it immediately, and for the first time all evening, I saw something shift in her face. Not confidence, not triumph, but fear. That flicker of recognition, that tiny crack in her mask of arrogance, was more satisfying than anything I could have shouted back at her. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. But her entire body tensed, like she already knew exactly what was inside, and she was trying to figure out how much she could lie her way out of before anyone else saw it too. And in that moment, I didn't need to say a word. The real conversation was just about to begin, and I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was just going to let the truth speak for itself. The moment Amanda's hand touched the folder, the entire room shifted, like someone had turned down the volume on everything except the sound of that soft paper rustling under her fingers. She looked at it like it might bite her, like maybe there was still a way to walk it back, to play dumb, to pretend this wasn't what she thought it was. But I could see it in her eyes before she even flipped the cover open, that flicker of dread, that flash of recognition that told me she already knew exactly what I'd brought to the table, and more importantly, exactly what she was about to lose. She opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and at first she didn't say a word. She just stared down at the first page, the draft sale agreement with her name printed neatly in the interested party field, the address of Grandma's house in bold at the top. She turned the page and saw the email thread between her and Mitch from Clearline Real Estate, the one where he'd praised her for being discreet and business-minded and promised a quick, quiet closing. She flipped again and came face to face with the property listing mock-up, complete with interior photos, a proposed price tag, and a tagline that made my blood boil. Charming estate with sentimental value, ready for new memories. Her fingers trembled slightly, just enough that I caught it, though she tried to keep her face locked in that same smug detachment she always wore when caught red-handed. Her eyes darted across the table, looking for an ally, looking for someone, anyone, who might step in and offer her a lifeline. But no one said a word. Not Mom, not Dad, not even Eli, who sat beside me with his jaw clenched tight enough to crack his molars. It was like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room, replaced by something heavier and colder. Amanda opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Not at first. Just a faint stutter, a hiccup of air, the kind of noise someone makes when their story is unraveling faster than they can keep up with it. Then she forced a laugh, brittle and high-pitched, and tried to wave it all away like it was some big misunderstanding. "Okay," she said, voice cracking, "so what is this supposed to be? A joke? You really went through my private business and brought it here to dinner." Still, no one moved. No one defended her. And that silence? That silence was louder than anything she could have screamed. For the first time in years, Amanda didn't have the room wrapped around her finger, didn't have everyone falling all over themselves to excuse her behavior, to chalk it up to stress or desperation or bad luck. No, this time, everyone was watching her with the same dawning horror I'd felt weeks ago, when I first realized what she'd been planning behind our backs. And then, out of nowhere, Uncle Rick stood up. Now, if you'd asked me the day before who was most likely to say something meaningful in a moment like that, Rick wouldn't have even made the list. He was the kind of uncle you invite out of obligation, a little too loud, a little too drunk, a little too stuck in the past to be anything but background noise. But that night, he surprised everyone. He stood there, slow and steady, with a calmness I'd never seen in him before, and said something that cracked the entire evening wide open. "That's not the first time she's tried to screw this family over," he said, voice clear, steady, and sharper than anyone expected. Heads turned. Amanda's face went pale. Mine didn't move an inch. Rick looked directly at her, his gaze hard, eyes no longer dulled by cheap whiskey, but lit with something sharper, memory, maybe, or rage that had finally found its moment. "She did the same damn thing 10 years ago," he said. When your grandfather passed, and the insurance payout was supposed to be split between everyone. You remember that? You remember how the paperwork got lost, and somehow your share was just a little bigger than the rest of ours. Amanda shook her head slowly, lips parted in disbelief, trying to protest, trying to work up another excuse, but Rick kept going. You think we didn't notice? We just didn't say anything because we didn't want to deal with the blowback. Because your mother begged us to let it go. But now you're trying to sell off your grandmother's house like it's some stock tip you stumbled across? You've got no shame, girl. The table was dead silent. My father was staring at his plate like he couldn't breathe. My mother was trembling, her fingers wrapped tight around her napkin like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to anymore. The truth had landed. It was spreading across the table like a slow, steady fire, burning through every lie Amanda had spent years building. And that's when she burst into tears. But they weren't the kind of tears that come from guilt. They weren't soft or breaking or full of remorse. No, these were angry tears, hot, sharp, furious tears that came from losing control, from being exposed, from watching the room turn against her and knowing she couldn't spin her way out of it this time. She looked at me with eyes full of fury, not sorrow. And in that moment, I knew something else. This wasn't over. Not even close. The silence after Amanda's outburst didn't last long, because chaos never stays quiet for more than a few seconds in a family like ours. My mother was the first to break it, her voice quivering as she leaned toward Amanda, reaching for her hand like that pathetic gesture could somehow erase everything that had just been laid bare. She didn't mean it like that, Mom said, looking around the table as if searching for someone to validate her desperation, someone to tell her this wasn't actually happening. She's just under a lot of pressure lately, and maybe this was all misunderstood. Misunderstood. That word echoed in my skull like a slap. Misunderstood was what you say when someone burns the toast, not when they try to quietly sell off the only home your dead grandmother ever knew without telling a single person in the family. But there she was again, running her usual defense playbook, the same worn-out routine she'd perfected over the years: deflect, minimize, and pretend the real problem was that everyone else was just overreacting. Amanda sat there still crying, but her eyes had dried into something colder now, something calculated, something vicious. She sniffled just enough to keep the pity rolling in her direction, while her hand clutched Mom's like she was the one who'd just been betrayed. My father looked like he was seconds away from blowing apart at the seams. His knuckles were white around the stem of his wine glass, and I could see the vein in his temple pulsing with a rhythm that said he was holding back years of words he'd never been allowed to say. But before anyone could add fuel to the fire, Uncle Rick pushed his chair back with a loud, scraping groan that made everyone flinch. He stood up slowly, stared down at Amanda, and shook his head like he couldn't believe he'd wasted so many years pretending not to see what was right in front of him. "I'm done," he muttered, almost to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've seen enough of this show to know how it ends." He didn't say goodbye. He didn't wait for anyone to stop him. He just grabbed his coat and walked out the front door like he was finally free of a weight he'd been carrying for far too long. I sat there watching him leave, my heart pounding in a weird rhythm I didn't recognize, somewhere between guilt and grim satisfaction. I hadn't wanted it to go this way. Not really. I hadn't come to that dinner planning to blow everything to hell. But maybe deep down, I knew it was the only way to finally make them all see her for what she really was. Maybe that folder wasn't just a backup plan, it was always the inevitable detonation, the moment where the pretending had to stop and the reckoning had to start. Amanda sniffed again and looked at me with that twisted little smirk she always used when she thought she still had a shot at spinning the narrative. "You set me up," she said through clenched teeth, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You planned this whole thing. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to make me look like a monster in front of everyone." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence settle again, let the weight of her accusation hang in the air like smoke. My father finally turned his head to look at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something raw and dangerous flicker in his eyes, a kind of disappointment that didn't have any room left for forgiveness. Amanda kept going, her voice rising now, shrill and frantic, like she was trying to reclaim the spotlight before it slipped completely out of her hands. This wasn't about the house. This wasn't even about money. This was about you wanting to tear me down. Admit it. And that's when I leaned forward, finally speaking, my voice calm and sharp and heavy with every ounce of truth she never thought I'd say out loud. No, I said slowly, meeting her gaze without blinking. You set yourself up when you thought we were all too stupid to notice. Her jaw locked, her hands clenched, and for one split second, I saw something break behind her eyes, not regret, not even shame, but the unmistakable realization that the control she'd always counted on was slipping through her fingers faster than she could grab it. And I wasn't about to offer her a damn thing to hold on to. It's strange how fast everything falls apart once the fire has burned through. In the days that followed that dinner, if you can even still call it that, the pieces of our family scattered like ash in the wind, each of us drifting further away from what we used to be, or maybe just revealing what we'd been all along. No one really spoke after that night. There were no apologies, no healing phone calls, no gentle attempts to patch things back together. Just silence, thick and deliberate, the kind that doesn't beg for reconciliation, but instead dares you to try and find meaning in the wreckage. Grandma's house still stood exactly as it had before, the chipped white shutters, the creaky porch swing, the kitchen cabinets that never quite closed all the way. Nothing had changed on the outside, but somehow it didn't feel the same anymore. I visited it once in the week after everything exploded, just stood in the front yard staring at it like it could somehow answer all the questions that had been circling in my head since I dropped that folder on the table. The sale had been blocked. The documents voided. The listing pulled. No signatures. No money. No betrayal, at least not the kind that could be measured in dollars. Amanda packed up and left the state 3 days after everything unraveled. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't send a text. She didn't even try to defend herself again. Just vanished, like a shadow retreating at sunrise. Mom said she was staying with a friend in Denver, but who really knows with Amanda? The truth is, I don't even think she ran because she was ashamed. I think she ran because she couldn't stand to sit in a room where she didn't control the narrative anymore. And maybe, in some twisted way, I understand that. When your lies collapse, there's not much left to stand on. But here's the part they don't tell you about revenge. The silence afterward is louder than the explosion. For a few days, I kept expecting to feel triumphant, to feel justified, to feel like I'd finally done something that mattered. But all I felt was tired. Not just tired in my bones, but tired in my soul, like something old and heavy had finally cracked open inside me, and now there was just this cold, hollow space echoing where trust used to live. Eli tried to talk to me about it. He asked me if I was okay, if I thought it was worth it, if I would have done it differently if I'd known how deep the fracture would go. I told him the truth I didn't know. Maybe it had to happen. Maybe Amanda would have burned everything down eventually with or without my help. Maybe I just lit the match before she could strike hers. But deep down, I kept thinking about that moment when Uncle Rick stood up. About how easily he slipped that old secret into the air like it had been sitting in his throat for a decade, just waiting for someone to ask. And I wondered how many other truths we'd buried in the name of keeping the peace, how many lies we'd told ourselves just to avoid watching the walls collapse. Then, 3 days after Amanda left, I got the message. It came to my email late at night, one of those moments where you're half asleep and scrolling without purpose. The subject line was simple: following up on the property. I opened it without thinking. The email was from Mitch, the same smooth-talking real estate agent Amanda had tried to work with. The message was short, only one sentence long, but it chilled me in a way nothing else had. I assume the deal's still on? That's it. No details, no names, no context. Just a single sentence that cracked something wide open in my chest. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. The deal was off. Amanda was gone. The listing had been pulled. But somehow, someone else had picked it up again, or had never really dropped it in the first place. And that's when the real questions started to settle in my mind like dust in an old attic. Who else knew about the sale? Who else had been involved? Who else had something to gain from gutting our family history like a fish and selling it off in pieces? Was it someone close to Amanda? Was it someone closer to me? Had I been so focused on watching her that I'd missed the bigger game? I stared at that message until the words blurred, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure whether to respond, delete, or forward it to someone else. But in that moment, something in me shifted, something colder and quieter than rage. Because suddenly I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. The fire may have burned through Amanda, but the smoke hadn't cleared, and I wasn't sure anymore who had been standing in the shadows while I was watching the flames. And suddenly, I wasn't sure who I could trust anymore.